live with Ben, Jeff, his brother Slim Kenneth, I think it is, and my dinner. And
Slim Whitman.
Okay. I just made sure that I've got the cooler on.
Oh yeah, good call.
Got to put that thing on.
No cooler tragedies. I mean, yep. Overheating tragedies.
Yep. So, Jeff, if you tell us what your brother's like, and then if you
he's an insufferable git who reads lots of boring websites and something about the Jews.
Ooh.
Apparently, he's joining a white power group of some kind. I don't know. No, he's generally a pleasant fellow, fun to hang out with a lot of the time, and he says he likes hate. That's one thing we're different on. I'm not a fan of hate. I mean, I can like some smack talk, but we've talked about before, Ben. I like things like, roasts and things where everybody's kind of in on the joke. I'm not really as big on stuff where somebody's like, where it's one-sided, I guess you could say, so.
I thought you said hate then.
Hate?
Yeah. Did you say hate?
Hate with an H, with a H.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah. So not, lest anyone get the wrong idea from my opening joke, not hate as in like actual like hate of groups, but more like, just like smack talk type, individual, conflict type stuff or whatever you want to call it, snaps and disses and things and such. So yeah,
So, do you think that's a general STP versus SFP thing?
I mean, somewhat maybe, I suppose to varying degrees, obviously. I think what I've noticed, it seems like from the STPs I've known, is they tend to be, like, I think SPs in general get accused of being blunt or like sometimes, not, or abrupt or whatever, but I think of the two halves of that, the STPs are even more so. Like, they don't seem to acknowledge as much of a reason to sort of not censor, but like, I don't know, hold back certain things. They can be a little bit more like brutal sometimes in terms of their assessments of things and people. I think with SFPs, maybe we'll tend to be more that way when we're like agitated as opposed to a constant state. So I'm going to err on the side of promoting fluffiness instead of hate. But it's not that I don't enjoy a good diss. It's just, like I said, I kind of have to have that feeling that that everyone's in on the joke, and it's not like somebody's not actually getting their feelings hurt, kind of thing.
So, what was it like growing up with your brother? All together. So, how much older is your INTP brother? What's the age difference between you three?
My older brother is approximately a year and a half older than me, and my younger brother here is about 2.5 years younger than me, I think. Well, I guess less than a half, more like 2 years and 2 months or whatever.
Right.
So, what was it like growing up? Just the constant hell, just every day was a. No, when we were young, we were both a lot smaller, but he was especially small because he was born small, and so he was a little bit physically weak in those days. But he grew up to be slightly less physically weak now. And actually, for a time, he actually put some meat on his bones, but then he lost all that, and now he's skinny again.
Has he got another take on that story about the guy that came up in roller skates or rollerblades?
Oh, I don't know if he wants to tell me that or not, but yeah, I told him the story that. Yeah, well, apparently he doesn't have another take on it now. All I basically said was that the guy was on roller skates and had a backpack that was open with a bag of Doritos in it. He said the line about the all-black outfit. So talking about the old guy that went by when one of us was walking and the other one biking. Say, how about a bicycle built for two? So yeah, it's like for a number of experiences where random people have said things to us as they went by.
That was a crazy delivery. It made me choke.
Well, that's me, Mr. Crazy.
So any more fantastic anecdotes like that? Just
Hundreds
weird
of
things
them.
that happen.
Yes, hundreds of them. Yeah.
I'm all ears.
I remember my earliest memory of Kenneth was being mad that I was forced to give up my bedroom to him when I was a little kid, because I had my own room when I was a baby, and then where we lived in Michigan, it was like, I guess, 3-bedroom house. So where my parents were, and then there were 2 other bedrooms, and when he was born, I was forced to move in with my older brother into one room, and the new baby got the new room. So, I took every opportunity, probably not every opportunity, but the occasional opportunity to push him around and stuff, because, he needed to learn his place or whatever. There was some toys I think they gave him that used to be mine, and, I did the usual, jealousy of the new baby, and I wanted to grab my toys back, and I can't have those are mine. All that kind of good sibling relationship stuff. Yeah, and I sort of felt like in school that once we were all in school together, I tended to be associated as being the brother of my brothers rather than being myself. So it's like being referred to as Scott's brother or Kenneth's brother.
That's not good for an SP.
Well, I don't think it's particularly good for anyone. Like people, need to have their own individual identity. So a lot of those like stereotypes of the middle child, I kind of did fall into, feeling like I was the ignored one and the other 2 got more attention than me. But probably some of that was, just how all kids feel at times. But it did seem like a lot of the time that I would sort of have to join their games, and they didn't want to join mine most of the time. But so the only way I would, play with my brothers was to like do whatever they wanted to do, as opposed to the other way around. But I realize that's like, again, it's probably some revisionist history. There were probably plenty of times where I was initiating things that I just kind of blocked out for whatever reason. Want to feel sorry for myself or whatever. I don't know. Memories that way. But I did always feel like they were closer to each other than I was to either one of them when we were kids. Anyway, they tend to, for whatever reason, end up with more shared interests. Not that there weren't some things that we all were interested in, but
such a young age.
What?
Like, I agree with it in retrospect, but I don't know exactly why. Like, even from a very young age, I tend to just do more stuff with Scott instead. And I don't know why I felt that made sense when I was, I wasn't making a calculated decision at age 4 or whatever.
So can you hear him, Ben, from where he is?
Just about.
Okay, because I can move a little closer.
Yeah. Yeah, buddy up your brothers.
What about my brothers?
I said buddy up your brothers.
Oh, buddy up. So, not familiar with that one. Yeah, I mean, I can only guess what it would be as far as like why that happened. I guess Scott may have actually sort of kind of as the oldest brother kind of taken more of a leadership role in kind of initiating things, and so that may have just been like, you know, he
No one to blame but yourself.
he may have had sort of a slightly more natural kind of protector role for his younger brothers than I did. You know, like I said, our relationship may have started with petty jealousy, so so it was a continuation of that, but maybe I don't know. I remember sort of having this attitude that Kenneth was a little bit too young punkish, and I needed to like tell him, hey, you need to step back there, young son. I don't know. I just remember being like, I mean, I guess it's just the nature of the personality. He was more uh, resistant to things. Like, I mean, if I'd had some kind of obedient younger brother that I could just like tell to do things and he would do it, then we probably would have had a closer relationship because, as kids, it's like, if you have someone that goes along with you, you're more likely to do. But he was more of a, he was more like me. He was more rebellious. So we didn't. Some of the things, probably some of the reasons we ended up getting along better in some ways, were some of the reasons why it took a little longer because we both were kind of headstrong and stubborn and had our own way of wanting to do things. Scott was. I mean, he certainly had his own ideas about things too, and. But I guess he always sort of had a little bit better ability to kind of adjust to the social norms or whatever that were present in a certain situation. I don't know. That's just me kind of BSing some stuff. But
I'm curious, what happened with the bedroom situation? Was it always
that's
three
kind of a
brothers,
personal
two
question,
bedrooms?
Ben. No, what specifically about a bedroom situation?
Well, it's just the idea is like who ended up getting one room to themselves.
Well, actually, that changed later on, and it still wasn't me. Because when we moved into the house, when we moved to Texas, at the beginning, it was the same setup as before, where Kenneth had his own room, and then Scott and I shared a room. And then later on, I guess Scott had achieved some sort of, achievement level where he was granted the ability to have his own room. So they moved him into Kenneth's room and put Kenneth in my room. So once again, I had to share a room, but then it was with him instead of Scott. So it wasn't until my parents got divorced when I was 13 that I actually got my own room to myself again for the first time since I was a little baby. So yeah,
And then
that's that riveting story.
So what was it like with your father? I know you've told little bits about this before.
He was a.
That would take a long video all of its own.
Yeah.
He was an arrogant tyrant who was really good at a lot of things, and so he imparted some of his knowledge onto his children of things.
He most unpleasant manner possible.
Not always. I mean, we did. I never want to completely paint the picture like we were like just beaten daily and fed gruel or whatever, because we did do some activities with our father, like we used to make model rockets, and then we would go out to the park, and he had this contraption that would shoot off the rockets. So
real rockets or water rockets?
They were actual explosive fuel rockets. They're just small. They use some sort of dry ignitable engine stuff, kind of like a firecracker.
Yeah, what he said.
I don't know the actual chemical makeup, but you actually had a fuse that you lit, but that was instead of doing it by hand like a firecracker. That's the contraption that Jeff mentioned. It used like electrical current to cause the fuse to ignite. You could do it from a distance by pushing a button.
Yeah, so we would go out and do that sometimes, and sometimes it worked out better than others because they would have like parachutes where they would at some point release and then fall to the ground. But if it was windy enough, then they would come down somewhere far away from where we were, and we lost them. So that happened on occasion. He was also like, I mean, he took a leadership role in some of our activities, like he was a soccer coach and Cub Scout leader and stuff like that. So
when I think about it, however, I think ultimately the reason that we enjoyed those activities went well and him doing those with us is because anything that he already liked personally, either that he'd done perhaps as a kid or just thought it was a good idea, if we were interested in, then he would guide us through it or whatever. But the idea of us coming up with our own things that we wanted to do, he wasn't really much in trying to encourage us to do things that we like that he didn't. Like if it was something we thought was cool that our father didn't, he either forbid it or just not encourage it, depending on the case.
Yeah, and I've talked about that, from obviously from my perspective, and that I was probably, I felt like anyway, the most expressive of the three of us, but that was stifled often by my father. So I sort of ended up retreating into doing a lot of things by myself, because when I would kind of try to share things with other people, like he would put a stop to it, especially when it was things like playing music that I liked, which he always hated and said was terrible. So even if it was just me singing stuff, like he would allow me to do that, like in the car for like a few minutes, and then it would basically be like, okay, that's enough. He wanted, he mostly wanted complete silence in the car, unless it was a really long trip, in which case we were allowed to slightly make certain noises from time to time. But it was a very different situation than me and my son, where I always was playing something in the car, and encouraged Morgan to do things like sing along to the radio and stuff like that. So in that area, we're like complete opposites.
I think about it to this day that, and I assume it's got to be, logically, it seems like it would come from our experiences with car trips and stuff as children with our father. That, like, if I remember, like, in a car trip with really anybody, I mean, it's friends, I'm not just riding with strangers, but up to and including, family members now, if more than a few seconds go by without someone saying something, it starts to feel really uncomfortable to me, because it feels there's like this air of something wrong, like that. Because I think that feeling of being in a car and being silent was sort of that we'd all just been told to stop making noise or whatever by our father would lead to those periods of silence, like
Yeah.
So it's like this almost someone's just been reprimanded is like the feeling I have whenever there's just silence in a car trip. It feels awkward and uncomfortable.
Yeah, I think I basically agree, which is why it's kind of fortunate that most of the people that I do go on any kind of car trips with tend to like to talk most of the time,
Right.
or if we're not, we can be listening to something, where we're both sharing an experience, as opposed to.
Most of my friends have been the same way. I think I didn't even really think about it until I was riding in a car with like one of my friends who's like the one who's not that way, like who isn't nearly as talkative as most of my other friends and myself. And we get along just fine, but just usually in any situation I do a lot more talking than he does. And I don't think it was that I was necessarily really bothering him badly, but like he sort of pointed out kind of jokingly that we didn't have to always be talking. And so I'm like, I guess we can just, so we, even just sitting there kind of half jokingly to prove a point or whatever about sitting in silence in the car, it's still, even with it being, the point of it being to kind of sit there and not talk, I still felt uncomfortable. Like it still felt very awkward to me to have to be sitting silently in a car. So,
I don't mind as long as, we can be listening to something. Like if there's someone who just says like, well, I'd rather listen to music or something rather than talk, I'm fine with doing that as long as it's something I don't mind listening to.
So the issue there is that all your music sucks. And so I don't ever sit and just listen to whatever you're playing.
I like a wide variety of things, which makes it more likely that if I was riding in someone else's car, that I could enjoy what they were playing. But obviously, it's not 100%. There's still things that I could be like, okay, I don't want to listen to this crap the whole way or whatever. Hopefully, if I was going to ride in someone's car for any length of time, we could discuss that sort of thing ahead of time enough that we would avoid that situation.
In my case, music for me is almost always like it's a complementary thing to something else. Like I don't just sit and just listen to music as an activity. I always listen to it while I'm doing something else at the same time. So just similarly, if I'm sitting in the car and no one's saying or doing anything else, nothing going on but music, it's better than silence. but it still feels like you could be listening to the music and talking or something else at the same time.
Yeah, and most of the time I'm fine with that in terms of like if I'm not listening to like a specific show where I'm really trying to hear every word of it or something. If it's then it can just sort of the music can become sort of background, for talking about whatever over that. So it's, I'm pretty flexible when it comes to such things. When I'm driving by myself, I have to have something playing because I'll start to like fall asleep if I don't or something. But yeah, I don't even know how we all got off on that. So I guess I was just
no
talking.
surprise there that just tangent into
Yeah, well, I guess it was because I was talking. He asked me about our experience with father.
right.
So one of the things that I, have focused on many times before, that one of the reasons it took me so long to sort of realize that I was a extrovert in Myers-Briggs terms was that my early years, my expression had been repressed so much that I just sort of got used to being less expressive and kind of quieter and stuff, because I bet it was more of a sort of a rational decision where at some point I realized like the quiet kids don't get messed with as much. So I made the conscious decision to become one of the quiet kids, even though it wasn't as natural to me as it was for small. And then as an adult, at some point I realized I was kind of tired of that. I was like, man, now it's kind of difficult to get out of this.
You say your father was a tyrant. Was he a tyrant towards your INTP brother as well? Because it may have just been that he didn't like you doing SP stuff. I just wonder if he was a tyrant towards him as well.
His attitude was the same. It's just, I think, what Kenneth referenced earlier about if you were down with our father's interests.
Yeah, he lined up
was
more.
He was the closest to him, so there were more opportunities
than me than you as
Yeah.
far as I think lining up with.
There were more opportunities for those kind of experiences with him. So there, but it didn't mean that he still didn't rule over him with an iron fist. It was just like there were more times they could have shared activities because they had a wider or a larger list of interests that they had in common, I guess.
So, Jeff, did you have the least in common with your father?
That's what he just said, and I basically would probably agree with that. Although there were the only thing I guess that I could bond with my father slightly with that the other two didn't as much was sports stuff, and my father wasn't really into that, but he would actually like sometimes watch a sport thing with me and discuss it slightly and things like that. So
he interject vaguely racist comments.
So he didn't have. He was never like passionate about sports, but he had enough knowledge that he could carry on a conversation about a particular sporting event.
It's just sport. You gotta leave the S off talking to a British guy.
I'm sure he translates in his head from the indistinguishable American.
It's sport, not sports, but then you had to say math with an S at the end of it. Right. It's ridiculous.
There was somebody I saw once that did like a video where they had like a chalkboard where they had the two words and they like erased the S off one and added it to the other. I thought that was pretty funny, but yeah, I overall I guess I probably had the least in common with him. Though, as we've discussed before, if you get deep into that functional analysis, the irony of that is that our like way of thinking is actually more similar. And that may be why years later that he described me as his quote most level-headed rugrat unquote, which I was surprised by at the time. But then later, when I sort of analyzed it, well, that maybe it made a certain amount of sense that even if he had less in common with me, when I actually did express something, of my thinking process, he could understand it, better that way. I don't know. That's just a guess.
Moreira said that if one of your parents is like your opposite type, where all four letters are opposite, then it can put you off that type.
Yeah, and I think I was fortunate to not have that happen entirely because one of my best friends, growing up, I think was the same type as him. So I had a peer that was an example of someone that I didn't have that kind of relationship with. We were friends and we could do stuff together and had, he would still have his moments, I guess, where he would be trying to not control me, but just like encourage. He would say things like, you're more intelligent than you act like you should apply yourself more. Like he would say things like that, but he wasn't. But because he wasn't my father, it didn't come with any kind of authority. It was just he would give me unsolicited advice of things he thought about me, whatever.
Well,
But he did
the way you worded it, I thought that you were talking about your father just for that split second.
No, my friend Abai from originally from India, who I think is also an INTJ, and but again he like I said, just from the nature of him not being my father, not being an authority over me, there was a different relationship, and so I was able to appreciate some aspects of INTJs that I probably wouldn't have if my father was really the only one that I knew that much.
The experience I had is that I knew a lot of, when I was at school in Leicester's, that a lot of the children that were, I think it's second generation, where the parents were the actual immigrants, and it was like they were like had a very strict upbringing, so there might be more SJ because they were like second generation SJ type aspects, so that might have come through in his attitude of how you apply yourself.
Yeah, and some of that obviously is kind of cultural, just from the culture he came from. It's obviously very different than it.
And also, though, the people that emigrated would be people who would have had something about them in terms of the ability to take a risk, go to another country. These people that had a lot of get up and go and a lot of motivation.
Props for working in get up and go into the conversation.
Stick to it.
But yeah, I don't really know a whole lot about his family because I didn't really care. But I did spend quite a bit of time in his house over those years, junior high to early high school, I guess time. I would come over, especially in the summer, and we'd kind of alternate between playing games outside. I already told you about our sort of weird makeshift cricket thing that he taught me, and then we would play inside, video games mostly, but sometimes video game versions of the same sports we were playing outside, like tennis. Like one of the best games of all time, Racket Attack for the original Nintendo.
What year was this? It's just so that NT's watching might want to know about what kind of games and stuff.
It was many years. I mean, I met him in the mid '80s, and so it was from then through the mid '90s, I guess. So about that decade or so. So I mean, as far as video games, it was like the stuff that was.
It's the only time I've ever worked playing video games.
the original Nintendo Entertainment System, and then the Sega Master System, and then the next generation, which was the Super Nintendo and the Genesis, basically.
Mega Drive, that they call it in Europe.
So whatever. What the Master System or
the Genesis?
The Genesis.
Mega Drive outside of America.
I didn't even know that. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so I mean, the games, like I said, the games that I like to play the best were usually the sports games. But there were some other ones, and one we played a lot that I was never good at, but the others played it so much, meaning Abai and my brothers, that I ended up playing a lot of it too. Was Street Fighter 2. And so I got better at just for the sake of playing it so much, but I still was not as good as any of them. So I would usually lose to most of the time. But but every once in a while I'd get a victory. I got much better at playing Mortal Kombat than Street Fighter. So when Kenneth and I played that, we were actually closer to evenly matched sometimes when we played. Depending on which characters we used, because we were both better with certain people. So, but that was probably the game I ended up getting the best at because I wasted a ton of money in the arcade playing it and getting better at it.
Did you like Chun-Li?
That was Scott's character.
You mean to play or
just for thighs?
Pretty good thighs. I wasn't especially good playing her, but she did have the upside down kick move, which was pretty cool. So I could do that one. I think probably on Street Fighter. Dalsim was probably the character I got the best at. Mostly because he was the easiest to annoy people with. Then to be one thing I usually got good at was finding the most annoying traits of certain characters. Like with Mortal Kombat, it was Melina's drop kick thing, because it was one of those moves that it was kind of easy to catch someone off guard with if they weren't expecting it, or even if they were. I also like playing with Baraka on there, the guy with the knife arms. But yeah, I would say another thing that could tie in both Abai and my brothers was that after I'd known him for a few years, actually
I was just gonna ask you told the story of how he stole your friend away.
Yeah, I'm about to do that. I originally met him in third grade, I believe, and then he was here. He was
That means nothing to me. Third grade. What is that?
okay.
What year is that?
Somewhere like that age.
Nine?
Yeah, I guess 9 years old,
Right.
maybe 8 or 9. I don't know, somewhere in there.
Because your age was always a little
It
off.
should mean like Ben, all the stuff you follow with like, I mean, like U.S.
Yeah,
like
but I don't know this grade stuff.
all these politics shows and all these stuff you know better than me, but you never bothered to learn the school grading system. It's
No.
like completely pervasive. And anyway, it's not that complicated. It's like basically, I mean, not everybody's the same, has the same birthday. It's not the same for everybody. But since I had a summer birthday, then every year the entire school year I was the same age. So it was like first grade was age 6, second grade age 7, third grade age 8. If I do it that way, I can figure out exactly how old it is. But anyway, so I guess I met him when I was 8. And then the family, they actually went back to India for his 5th grade year. I guess would have been age 10, and then he came back halfway through 6th grade, and at that point, he was before that he and I were like into pretty much a lot of the same things. We're like one of the main things we were into was Transformers, so we would play with the Transformers toys and talk about that and stuff. When he came back, he got more into the video games, and at that time. When I don't know the timing on this, Kevin can probably correct me, but at some point, at some point they released, they started releasing more of like what they called RPGs in video games, even though they're not really RPGs, but they're basically like adventure games, but that's what they're labeled in video game terms as RPG. Mostly really long, boring games where you just spend a lot of time walking back and forth to wait for monsters to appear so you can fight them and gain experience points. So things like World of Warcraft that have come since then are sort of like that same formula, just like with better graphics and longer quests and things like that. But
there'd be a difference. You play with a lot of other people,
right? But anyway, they, meaning Abai and my brothers, were into that stuff, and I wasn't. So I sort of felt like they stole my friend away from me because he spent like the summer of 1990. Playing with them, all that stuff, and meanwhile I wasn't really into that, so I sort of was like, oh well, he played more with them than he did with me. So
I can't remember exactly the time, but especially considering you were saying that you had done some playing of games you were more interested in with him, but I think probably what led to it was he got interested. It was Final Fantasy, one of the first RPGs a lot of people in America played, even though the third game was actually already out in Japan when they released the first game in America. But he probably already liked it, and it was probably bring it to kind of see to get you into it. Also, you found it boring. We were like, oh hey, we jumped on it instead, and I even remember this as a part of the elaborate story that involves like the whole Wreck-It Ralph and saying how you're sort of distance from video gaming and all that was that I remember once Scott and I and Byron had been playing it for a while. And we're really into it and everything. You feeling left out from all of it, wanted to kind of play some, and so we're kind of like, oh, I guess we'll let Jeff play this part or whatever. But of course, it was like you hadn't been playing the whole time, didn't really know what you were doing, so it was like a self-fulfilling. Well, obviously Jeff doesn't understand how to play games. Like, look, he just doesn't know what he's doing. Boo, get out of here. And
there were a lot of moments like that growing up. That's why I described it as being like I felt like the left out one a lot of times. And some of it I realized it's one of those things within the moment of it, the experience, you don't have any perspective. If I looked back on it now and had the ability to sort of discern what was occurring, then maybe I could have made things go smoother. But obviously at the time I just, I was quick to take any slight thing as a personal affront and a reason to.
We were, I was, 12, 13 years old or
Yeah.
whatever, and liked the game, so all I cared about was enjoying the game. Didn't care if you felt left out or whatever. All that mattered was, he's screwing it up. Get him out of here. We don't want him here.
And Scott was all about efficiency and trying to beat the game as fast as possible. So if there was a person standing in his way, they were just a pawn to be moved out of the way. That's one thing that didn't change, even though Scott got more polite over the years, like I've talked about in previous videos. Like most recently when we were playing Alibaba on the simulation thing on my iMac, he still like sucked all the fun of it by by like having to show Morgan that we've got to upgrade all the weapons and armor as fast as possible to get to the to beat the game. And it was like he still was too singularly focused on that. I'm exaggerating slightly by saying he sucked all the fun of it. There was still some fun to it. It was just Morgan's kind of, in that sense, similar to me in terms of just sort of wanting to wander around and explore the game things. And Scott was like trying to get him back focused on you have to acquire these things in as efficient a manner as possible so that you can achieve the goal. So that's been a constant as far as his personality, but.
Which is why I think it's interesting that I'm clearly sort of this reflection of, the basic concepts there as far as the efficiency and all that. I share that as a core sort of thing. I think the big difference is that this is why I am superior to both of you, and that I've absorbed the good things of both sides. Is that while I still have that sort of that calculation as far as he has, I'm much better at applying your more sort of human-oriented outlook on things to figure out if people, this guy, try to make a way to make it fun for like you also, or Morgan also, try to think of sort of a bit more of the psychological personality aspect of it instead of only thinking of it like everything is maths, excuse me, the way Scott would, in that I think I'm better at translating things into sort of acceptable human terms for other people that Heath than Scott is.
So you can make a sport of maths, but you can't make sports out of math. Anyway, that was better in my head than when I said it out loud. Yeah. That's what life's all about: throwing things against the wall and see if they stick.
So, did all three of you and your father go to watch the Transformers movie in '86?
No, in fact, our father forbade us from watching that movie in the movie theater. I don't even remember the reason why that was. I think he just decided it was something about the fact that the movie was just to sell toys, even though there were plenty of other things. He was so like arbitrary and selective about those things. Like it would be something. If he liked it, then everything went by the wayside because it didn't matter. But if it was something he decided that he was going to randomly oppose,
and that's probably the looking back at my childhood and everything, as far as anything I ever really wanted to do that I wasn't able to do because of my father not wanting to do it, missing out on seeing Transformers the movie in the theater was probably the biggest, most egregious thing. And that I've told Jeff and other people around here several times, my memory of why is him saying we didn't know exactly why he didn't want us to see it. As young as I was at the time, which again it came out in '86, I think. So yeah. I would have been only, in summers I probably been only 7 years old. The memory in my mind of it is just images of basically being in a movie theater, seeing the Transformers the movie poster on the wall, and my father with like a stern, angry face. So like, it's probably that I said something about wanting to see it, and he just said something negatory.
Well,
I don't even remember a conversation. I just had, again, these are the images in my head are excitement, movie poster.
It probably won't make you feel any better, but it was absolutely amazing when I saw it in the cinema.
It's what I've seen it many, many times on video and all that since then. I've always loved it, but yeah, I always missed out on the experience of seeing.
Well, they brought back some other things like Back to the Future and things like that to the theater. So maybe at some point, we can find a showing of Transformers movie in the theater and
the cinema.
And for them kids that are watching, we ain't talking about that crappy Michael Bay Transformers. Right. We're talking about the original, the real.
Hey, I also like those crappy Michael Bay Transformers.
I saw the crappy.
It's all right. You're entitled to like bad movies. I always said that's fine.
The only reason I watched the new Transformers movies was because they did cast Peter Cullen as the voice of Optimus Prime.
Yeah,
if they hadn't done, I mean, that's such a
it would have been the ultimate deal breaker. If
right. Without that, I
but
wouldn't consider that was a big part of the reason I
I
watched.
saw the first two and gave up after that because the second one was so horrible.
It's funny because the second's the worst of all of them. So
and the only redeeming factor in that was well, okay, there were three things, I guess. One was the fact that I ended up actually seeing it for free because at some point, like 3/4 of the way through the movie, the AC stopped working, so they gave everybody a free pass on their way out the door. That's what they said happened. It could have just been, "We're sorry you saw this horrible movie. Here, have a free pass." So retroactively, it ended up being free. And then there was like the Megan Fox slow motion running scenes, and John Turturro, who's a great actor, and so
Oh yes, he's funny.
he are good just because of him, even though the script is one of the worst of all time. So
in fact, he'd be a good Doctor Who, John Turturro.
he'd be good at anything. Like you pretty much take John. Like I told you before, he's one of those people. I was just saying last night, Kenneth, that Tim Meadows is a guy that I would cast in almost anything if I was in charge of casting it. John Turturro is another person. Like I would find a place for John Turturro in pretty much anything. Like so certain people who make movies a lot, like Adam Sandler comes to mind just because I've seen a lot of his movies. That he tends to have a lot of the same cast in his movies because there's people that he just likes working with and does that. He's not the only one, but my roster, John Turturro and Tim Meadows would be two of the people that would be on my list of people that I would want to.
And how is that reflective of your personality type?
I like people that are versatile and can play different characters. And Ben and I have talked about Philip Maddock. Is that how you say his name?
Yeah, Philip Maddock.
Who was in several different Doctor Who stories and played distinctly different characters in each one and was good in all of them. So he's obviously somebody that I don't even know if he's still alive, but if he'd be another guy that if he was still alive and still around, I would have no problem casting in pretty much anything because I think he could take whatever part and go with it.
So did Slim watch Doctor Who with you in the 80s?
Yeah.
We
both kind of stumbled onto it on PBS one night. I think I'm pretty sure that we watched Monty Python first. And,
I don't remember the order, but I mean PBS showing.
And it was probably we were watching that and then kept the TV on and Doctor Who came on after it. It was something like that. And I finally figured out after all those years when I rewatched all the ones that the first episode that we actually came in the middle of was the Ark in Space.
That's not bad. It's near the beginning. Fourth Doctor.
Yeah, and so of course that's why we didn't know for quite a while that there was any other Doctor besides the Fourth Doctor because that's all we saw. So yeah, my childhood memory, my fuzzy memories had changed slightly. The original scene that I saw because I remembered it as Sarah falling down a shaft or something like that. But when I watched it again, I realized it was probably the part where she was crawling through the kind of shaft thing. The Doctor was trying to help her get through the tunnel or whatever it was. So I sort of mixed up that or melded together that and the scene in Genesis of the Daleks where she actually does fall off of the whatever that thing was called. Looks like a big jungle gym. I sort of combined those two things in my head. But anyway, yeah. So I figured out the Ark in Space was actually the first story we saw, and the PBS channel at that time would show the entire story as one long thing as opposed to divided up into episodes. So we saw that one, and then we liked it enough. We were like, oh well, next week when we watch Monty Python, we'll keep it on and watch that show again. So the next one was Genesis of the Daleks, I believe. So. Or at least the next one we saw. So anyway, so yeah, I went right into one of the best stories they ever did. So we were hooked until we weren't. Again, like I said, the actual total time that I watched Doctor Who as a kid was probably less than 2 years. It seems like longer, but because when I started thinking about it, I was like, well,
I watched a lot of different time. I remember watching all the way up through some amount of Sylvester McCoy stuff, which was the last original.
And when the only time frame I have of it really is that I got at Starships and Dragons, a shop that doesn't exist anymore. I got a Doctor Who magazine, and it was the 25th anniversary issue.
88, yeah.
Right. So in '88, and the story was, on the cover it had Sylvester McCoy and the Sophie, whatever the girl played.
Yeah, Sophie Aldred.
Yeah, because I think that was the season she joined the show. And of course, we hadn't got to that yet because on the PBS channel they were just starting the Colin Baker episode.
Yeah.
So, but that particular anniversary issue had stuff about all the previous Doctors. And at that point, I had never seen the second or the third, so that magazine was my first introduction to them. Which is why in retrospect, I thought the second Doctor was the grumpy Doctor, because all the pictures they had of him in that, he had a scowl on his face. And then what I learned when actually watching his episodes is actually he was one of the friendlier of the incarnations of the Doctor. But didn't know that at the time, obviously. But anyway, yeah, so but it wasn't too much after that I watched it, like after that magazine, because like I said before, the last episode I remember seeing was The Greatest Show in the Galaxy, which is the last story of the second Sylvester McCoy season. So I never saw the last season, I mean, because I think probably the PBS station, either the next week Doctor Who wasn't on at all, or they like went back to the beginning of the Fourth Doctor again or something. It was something like, basically I was like, okay, I've seen this already, and so I wasn't as excited about it, and I just kind of lost interest with it after that, got into other things. So I think about that, I'm like 88 into 89, again, that was like junior high school for me. Other interests start to come along, and I got really into music and radio countdown shows, and still had some interest in sports and other stuff. So I just, a lot of other things pulled me in different directions. So, I didn't have like
yeah.
I didn't have the reference points. I don't know another better way to put that I do now in terms of keeping track of things that I do in the time frame of stuff. I was just sort of living, and like things were there and then things weren't there, and then I just moved on and did things. So that's, that's the best way I can put it.
Also at that age, so much change year to year in just a person. You probably notice the same in your son.
Yeah, I mean that's why, I mean, with my son, is like he would, up until pretty recently, he would act like 6 months ago was like some eternity in time, That's like a whole different him, and I can sort of remember things being like that when I was a kid. I mean, it really was kind of day to day what, kind of shepherded by our parents as far as, okay, what is it we have to do today? We didn't have a whole lot of room for, exploring a lot of things, because it was pretty much just the environment that they allowed us to be in, and then we just made the most of it. So
I'm curious what your father was like as a ladies' man. Have you got any anecdotes about that? About some of the moves he would try, things like that, or things you might have seen.
He was inexplicably good at that for some reason. I don't know. I guess for the same reason, like, I mean, there are a lot of women that are attracted to just kind of intelligence and somebody that just gives off the ability to, is just smart and knows a lot of things and is capable of. Yeah.
The way he carried himself and everything. So,
like I said, he could assume sort of leadership roles and things, even though I don't think public speaking didn't come naturally to him, but the act of sort of taking charge and being the one that, got some things coordinated and stuff.
Leader or whatever.
Right. He was good at doing that sort of thing. And he was very authoritative just in the way he came off. And that, obviously there's a lot of women attracted to people like that, in terms of somebody who, exudes confidence and just mastery of a lot of different subjects, and being able to talk about a lot of different things and have different experiences. He was in the Army and was a spy, so, he could talk about that too. And, that impresses women sometimes, things like that, so he had a lot of different things that he had knowledge of. So, he never came across as, he didn't come across as like the typical like nerd type of person at all. Like, even though a lot of his interests could have been described as nerdy, he in terms of his social, communication, he didn't come off that way.
Did he have any spy gadgets?
Probably.
Yeah, I don't think he was. Like many things that I think he sort of embellished slightly. I mean, I think that I don't think they were like hiding in a pond with a periscope so much. As
I don't know.
Doing military intelligence work or whatever.
He didn't go into a whole lot of detail about what his actual specific activities were in Vietnam or anything like that.
I don't think he was a ninja.
Yeah, I don't think so either. He was the Cub Scout leader of the army.
Right.
He was good with a Swiss Army knife.
Well, but it was a bit of a James Bondy sort of thing to him in a lot of ways, in that gadget sort of things, whether he used them when he's in the military or not, was kind of his nature, and things said like making his own bullets,
Yeah.
Measuring the barcode on an envelope so he could recreate the priority code when he sent his own envelopes in the mail, have them get higher priority than normal. All sorts of things of that nature was sort of stuff that would come naturally to him.
And that's why I have said that when it came to those titles that Kersey attached to the types, why it fit perfectly for him to be the one that's called the Mastermind. He even liked the game Mastermind.
I mean, Jeff, have you thought of turning this into a sitcom?
What's that?
Have you thought of turning this into a sitcom? Because I think it would be
I told you I did before. When I was like 12 years old, when I wrote things down for like my own television network, and one of the shows was a sitcom about our life.
I've said to many like friends over the years that our father was a very fun person to be able to tell other people about, but like much more difficult to actually be raised by him. As Jeff was saying, it wasn't like he was just like abusively, beating us or whatever. It wasn't to that extreme. So plenty of people had it, I guess, much worse than we did.
There were a lot more threats of beatings than actual beatings over the years.
I mean, so he did use, physical punishment for basically anything that ever deserved punishment. In his opinion, his belt was pretty much, like a holster up. You just take the belt off real quick so you could use it, put it right back on again. So it was like, but he said it wasn't like he would get like, drunk and punch us or something like that. It was nothing to that degree. It was just more that, you got a, bad grade in school, belt. In fact,
actually, when he was drunk, the punishments were actually less because then he could
was
concentrate on
punishing. You put the wrong kind of food in the garbage disposal, belt. You knocked something over, belt, whatever. That's basically how it went.
Looked at him funny. That was pretty much literally looking at him funny would be enough to set him off sometimes. That's why I said it was a very different relationship than what I have with my son, where he can talk to me about virtually anything. I try to make sure he knows that he can do that, as opposed to my father, where it was like I would have to basically steel myself up to start a conversation with him, because I would have to be like, is this going to be one of those days where anything I say is going to make him angry?
Which I think it's nice to hear you saying that about the sort of the reverse thing as far as your own kid, because I think that's really one of the worst situations a parent can put on their kid, is having the kid totally uncertain as to how their parent is going to like treat them or react to them or whatever, like not having any confidence in their relationship with their own parents. It's a pretty terrible feeling to have. I do want to my finale to the belt mentioning it. Just I always have to mention the story. I had done something. I forget what age I was. I think it was probably during the time just after I was, with the divorce and restructuring of everything. There was a time I ended up where I was now the only one left. Just he and my father and me living together in the same house. And so if it was around that time, I was probably somewhere around maybe 14 years old, 13, 14, something like that probably. And so I had done something, and I think it must not have been anything really bad, or he would have been more serious about a punishment. But I was upstairs on like the second floor of our house, and he called up to me on the second floor. He was downstairs and told me to come downstairs and to bring his belt with me. And I didn't do it. I went without the belt, and he didn't like spank me or anything. I always wondered to this day if I had actually brought. Was it just a test? Like if I brought the belt, if you just said I'm going to spank you with the belt for being stupid enough to actually bring my belt down with you when I tell you to. Like it was a sort of a joke punishment that he was like. Again, it was almost like a threat of the spanking with the belt, but telling me to bring his belt along with me, like almost like the whole going outside and cutting a switch off of a tree for your own spanking.
That's psychological warfare. That
I was about to say that was one thing he definitely used a lot, was kind of that manipulation, the threat of something, and instilling fear in us that way by just sort of setting it up. That was something that he did a lot of. So there were a lot of things that were kind of, he said it like it was a test. There were a lot of things I think he sort of did set up as a test, sort of. and he always said things. He would say things like, that when you reach the point where you can kick my ass, then that's fine. Go ahead and do it, but then you have to leave.
As far as like, he did make various statements about like as far as because he had raised us for so long with like spankings as like punishments for things or threats of spankings or whatever. that you probably gave similar talks to Scott. Seems like one he would have been less likely to have a reason to have that. Scott just seems like he got punished less, but I don't know, again, because he kind of lined up with his mannerisms.
He was
more.
better at weaseling out of things
Yeah,
too.
that might also be it as well. But it was a similar sort of talk with me, where again, when I was getting into my teenage years, where he's like, I can't really just keep threatening with spankings or whatever as a punishments or whatever. And it was the same sort of thing, saying like, you'll get big enough to just hit me back or whatever.
Strategic intelligence.
The one thing that I always think about, as far as, and Jeff kind of said this very early on in this whole talk when sort of first bringing our father up into it, that like about things that our father's intelligent and like instilled, like taught us some important things or whatever, even if the lessons were often rough to take. And I certainly agree with that, in that there's several things where at the time as a child, even into, like I said, teenage era, it just felt like I was being, just treated poorly. Why was he so mean or whatever? And some of it probably really was, just uncalled for. But some of the other things, while they felt tough at the time, I'm kind of glad that I went through, because they did teach me things that I think, at least I'm glad to know or feel that they're strong parts of my personality now. One of the main ones he always pushed on me a lot was being observant about everything, the physical environment, how people are acting, whatever. And that's one of the things I now consider to be a skill, essentially, is being very observant about my environment, said both physically or or personally or whatever. And I thought of this because Jeff was saying about making us do tests about things. That was one of the sort of things he would do. He would sometimes, call me into the kitchen or whatever, or I'd come in and he'd say, ask me some sort of question about something that was going on in the room right now without telling me what he was wanting to know. He would like make me figure out what he was asking, like looking around the room or whatever. And he would often, make joke, if I was looking for something I couldn't find, he'd say, always, say stuff. If it was a snake, it would have bit you by now, and things like that.
Yeah.
He would, that we should be able to tell, push on us to that sort of tough love approach to that, as far as trying to make us better at doing things again that he thought was important. It's sort of, maybe that's why I think it's good that I'm observant now, is because he just made it seem important to me. But it's certainly something that I've carried off into my adult life. So I'm glad now, retrospectively, that he was tried to instill some of those things into us as kids.
So you can tell from that what I said earlier about how, when I first started thinking about temperament-wise, what was my father, how I originally thought, well, he could be an artisan type because well-developed senses for an INTJ. Of course, some of that, could have been military training. Some of it could have just been natural. I don't know, or other stuff in his life that led him to that. I don't know a lot about his father, other than he was also a jerk, and that he died young. So. But I don't know, obviously, what all went into that. But yeah, as opposed to some, NT stereotypes of being like the nerd that's always in a book and is running into walls and stuff, he was definitely not that aspect of it, because he was, like Ken said, big on being observant and stuff. Although he certainly had his moments where he wasn't really paying attention because he was focused on something else. So. Like times where, again, when you're trying to approach him about something and he was like in his office on his computer staring at something really hard, and you try to speak to him and he would kind of like just continue staring and not respond. And it was like, do I ask again and risk him getting angry at me for saying something again, or do I stand here until he responds, or do I just kill myself now and save us all the trouble?
You told me that story that you both ended up at a convention for delegates from Von Paul.
Yeah, that's the last time that I saw him. Was at that convention in 2012, and that had been the first time I saw him in like 10 years.
Yeah, I had not seen him since Christmas of 2000, so.
So that was odd. It was just sort of Morgan and I were there together, and we were in this kind of general session of the of the county that I live in, and my father lives in a different county now, so he was representing Robertson County, and I looked up and I saw him, and I was one of those kind of, I didn't do a double take. It wasn't quite the cartoon thing, but I was like kind of squinting, like, is that really who I think it is? Like of all the places to, it wasn't like it was completely foreign in the idea. Like, well, the first time I went to any kind of political meeting, it was with my father. So that in itself didn't like shock me. I was like, oh, what the hell is he doing here? It was just more like I wasn't expecting it. Not that it was like a place that I would never see him or something. It wasn't like I was at a rock concert and all of a sudden he was there. It's just some other place that he would never be. So yeah, that was, and I sort of mentally debated whether or not to say anything to him, but you mentioned Ron Paul there. The thing is, he was speaking right after that meeting in the auditorium thing, and so it was going to already be like, it would basically have to run in order to get over there in time. So as soon as that meeting was over, we had to like basically run out of there. So I didn't have time to say anything to him then. So it would have been kind of weird if that had been the last time that I did see him, like never speaking to him, just seeing him, But as it turned out, there were other meetings where the counties were back together again, and I actually did go up and speak to him, and I said something awesomely cliche like "fancy seeing you here" or something like that. And he didn't end up actually seeing Morgan because at the meeting I came back after the first day, Morgan had been kind of bored by the stuff and decided to hang out at the hotel that day. So when I did see him the next day, Morgan didn't see him. So I said, well, maybe we'll get an opportunity for you to see him because he hadn't seen him since Morgan was like 2 years old or whatever. And that ended up never happening. So and again, similar to not similar, but like in the word I'm trying to think of. True to form, I guess, for both me and my father, we talked, for an extended period of time that second day on a couple of different occasions, and yet at no point exchanged phone numbers, email addresses, any kind of way of contacting each other, because to me it was like I wasn't compelled to really seek out any kind of extension of the relationship. And in his case, yeah, I guess he just really didn't care that much about that, or if he didn't feel the need to express it. So
I've pretty much felt that same way in that I haven't encountered him, obviously in a way, partially because I haven't living anywhere near him. But I always felt the same kind of way that in this era of easy communication and all that if I personally have held no compelling reason to try to seek out communicating with him. I have nothing particularly I'd want to ask him or tell him or anything. And I feel that if it really mattered to him that he wanted to talk to me for even just casually, whatever, he certainly can, there's certainly enough connections around that he could easily, figure out someone that knew how to get in touch with me. And he hasn't tried to do that either. So it's kind of, we're just sort of in that, that never ending impasse there that I don't think it's, either one of us, for whatever reason, whatever his motivations or lack thereof are, or my own, that we don't any reason to make a connection.
Yeah. So I kind of I always have this idea that probably when he died, we'd be notified in some way, but I don't even know that for sure.
Right, so,
but in contrast to that, and we'll have to wrap this up pretty quick so we have time to get to our movie. But with our mother, she always, made the effort to stay in touch with us and at least, a semi-regular basis. So, it's obviously was more important to her to maintain that relationship once we were adults than it was to our father. So.
How come your mother didn't get custody?
Well, she did of me, not of the other two. And the answer to that is that's what the judge decreed.
Well, that's where your luck turned then, from being the middle child.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a lot of things that went into that, but that I won't go into here. But if you did have any final question you want to ask or anything like that, we could do that because we gotta get going here pretty soon. So.
Right. So Kenneth watched the video with me asking Jeff questions. Which question did you think, oh, I'd like to answer that?
I don't remember any of it at all.
Well, one of the questions was hobbies. What hobbies do you have?
Probably the question I'd be least interested in answering.
He likes to throw rocks at old ladies for fun. No, wait, I'm sorry. That's ESTPs. He likes to read Street Fighter.
I mean, it's fairly nerdy kind of things. I said as tying back to the whole, being connected with my older brother, being sort of more interested. For whatever reason, either I guess it could just be sort of my burgeoning personality, at the time, or whatever. I just made up a word. That because our father was, into nerdy type things, science related things, computer science stuff particularly. We had a lot of computers and computer related things around me from the time I was born basically. So I got into things like not Scott was more into the more sort of classically nerdy than computer programming and things like that I didn't ever get into. But as far as being sort of comfortable using computers to do things, playing games, that sort of stuff has kind of been my main hobbyish stuff most of my life. I've done a few other things over the years, but it's usually it felt comfortable kind of doing things on a computer. So it used to be pretty much nothing but games, but it became a lot more reading things, researching things, etc., beyond just playing games all the time. But still pretty uninteresting to talk about, which is why I said that of all questions, that one's not. I don't have a very interesting answer when it comes to the hobbies.
I, on the other hand, have a much more exciting life of watching YouTube videos and making YouTube videos.
I suppose I've got one question: is what do you think about this year's election?
It's still kind of in flux for me to really too much. I don't know. The whole election process in America is kind of ridiculous and how overblown and extremely lengthy it is, et cetera, et cetera. So, and all sorts of other minutiae that bothers me. I have relatively unmainstream, non-mainstream, or unconventional sort of opinions about a lot of things when it comes to how the politics is or should work, or government, et cetera, and probably also not be, but take way too long to go into, and would just sound like the ramblings of a deluded fool or whatever. Anyway, so at least according to this guy.
See, up to that point, he and I share a lot in terms of our perspective. You keep it vague enough, and we both pretty much agree on all that.
Yeah, I'd say he and I are both certainly fairly kind of anti-establishment with everything. Obviously, we're always trying to kind of buck the expected things or whatever.
Yeah.
And it sort of applies there too, where he and I don't share the same opinions about how things should actually be run or whatever, probably in almost every way. But as far as we are sort of in agreement about the kind of system that is used to determine all this stuff is really ridiculous.
One thing I would say, and I don't know how much this is true for Kenneth or not, but I've always sort of accounted it as being kind of an SP thing, but some people in obviously in higher degrees than others, the more that one side of something is expressed, or the more confident somebody is in repeating kind of their like sloganeering or whatever it is, the more I feel like doing the opposite or having hostility towards that, because it's like I'm just naturally contrarian, and I have that thing where it's like I get tired of hearing like one perspective, and so I'll actively seek out something else in response to that.
I'm always very strongly trying to make sure all like perspectives are covered, different angles, etc. That if people act like something's too black and white, I'll always try to point out lots of gray. And if there's a situation where there's mostly kind of two prevailing opinions, A and B, and I'm a big fan of A, and someone comes along and is too strongly and too blindly championing A, I'll start bringing up all the things that aren't so good about A and how B still has its merits. Even though I technically am in favor of A, I won't let somebody be too much of a too overzealous about even if they share my opinion, I will hold their feet to the fire or whatever on being logical about it and being reasonable about the actual situation.
Yeah, so we're very similar in that aspect, other than I don't care about being logical. But other than that, very similar kind of perspective on things where people use the term devil's advocate, but and I'm fond of saying I'm the devil's advocate unless someone's advocating for the devil, and then I'm God's advocate. I'm whatever they're not advocating for. But yeah, I have a tendency to kind of point out the other side of things, and also the fact that not everything is just two-sided. I hate that kind of where everything is presented as if, and not even just an issue being only two-sided, but that a person has to be like, you have to like choose this path in life as a child, and you're set on this for the rest of your life, and just that kind of attitude. I've never gotten with that. And of course, as Ben and I have discussed many times, it's kind of more of the guardian mentality that, of course, is like the majority of society. So there's more people who are like, well, we have to do this because we always did it. My father and mother did it. And,
I'm certainly more than this guy. Probably, though, I don't underestimate his degrees on this, but I'm strongly anti-tradition for the sake of tradition. Like anything where someone's explanation for something is because that's how it's always been done makes me ill. Like I think it's a terrible, terrible way to go about doing things.
I have learned to value some traditions more as I've gotten older, but again, it's not it's more like evaluating whether this tradition has merit, not just saying it's because it's tradition.
I don't think everything should automatically be done counter to a tradition thing simply because it's traditional. And like if something is just sort of fluff, just for fun, that's like, oh, it's just something we do because it's a tradition thing that doesn't really mean anything.
Yeah, customs is different than tradition.
That I'll stick with. Just like I said, like our mother is very into the sort of celebrating the typical like American holidays and having Thanksgiving get together meal in November and having some sort of like a Christmas time get together and the exchanging of gifts and that sort of stuff is very important to her. And none of those activities are important to me, but because they're important to her and she's important to me, I'll sort of play along, not like sarcastically, but I'll sort of get into it along with her. I won't pretend I am more than I really am, but I'll sort of flow with it because I know it means something to her, even though if she wasn't involved in those specific dates or the activities themselves, it wouldn't have no significance to me. It's just, for me, it's just an excuse to get together with the family that I enjoy. So that sort of stuff doesn't mean anything. But as far as methods of doing things or whatever, things where something's treated as respectful simply because it's old or all those sort of things like that aren't reevaluated to see if they really are the best way of doing things. With it's logical to continue to do things a certain way, or people are just doing it because that's what they're used to. And so that's something that certainly comes in conflict with a lot of things when it comes to things like political things or whatever.
Yeah, I was going to say, because there are so many people that have that mentality of if you're listening or watching something, that must be because you agree with it completely, because that's what people do. I've come up against that with some people where I'm listening to something because, like I said earlier, I like to listen to different perspectives on stuff. I don't just do one-sided everything. That some people have actually gotten into arguments with me based on something I was watching or listening to because they just assumed I must agree with it all, and they start arguing against the points of view of that person speaking or whatever. And I was been like, I'm listening to this with an open mind. I might agree or disagree. If we want to talk about specific things, I could tell you, but don't just. I hate the assumption of where if you're consuming something, then you must be one of those people, or anything like that. If you state an opinion on one issue, okay, now I've determined that you're in this group for everything else, and that idea of looking at people as just being groups is annoying to me. And I always talk about how some people would say, oh, well, you're being hypocritical because you have basically supported the concept of personality types, and that's a way of grouping people. I'm not opposed to all forms of grouping people, but it has to be done in the right way, in the sense that these are the things that I've gathered about you as an individual, and here's a group that this fits into based on that, as opposed to I'm going to gather a small amount of information about you in order to put you into a group, to de-individualize you and treat you just as group member X of whatever that is. That in itself is very offensive to me.
Plus also, the Kersey groupings, though, are based on motivation.
Right. And
that's different.
And it's over, studying people, it's like, a few thousand years of human, of several different people revered over the years in terms of observing humans and making comments about patterns that they see in people. It's not just one guy, wrote a book one day and said, I feel like calling some people this, or I saw this guy who does this, and so I just assumed a bunch of people are like that. I mean, there's a lot of work that went into that. And like Hannah said, I don't automatically assume just because a bunch of old people did some stuff that makes it good. I had to evaluate it for myself and see, does this have merit? And my initial reaction to all that stuff was how I usually am, was to be skeptical, sometimes openly hostile towards that. And then over time, when I started to see those patterns and things play out in my own life and the people I knew, seeing those things repeat themselves enough where I started to observe them myself and go, okay, there's actually some validity to this, I granted those things. But anyone who knows anything about me knows that it was not a way to have a convenient way to treat people as members of groups. I wasn't looking for something to be, oh, well, you're an SJ, therefore, I'm going to write you off because of all these other things. I am still an individualist, and that is one of my highest, principles. And when I meet a new person, my interest, if I have any interest at all, is to get to know that individual as a person, not to dehumanize them or find ways where I can reduce them to something that I can
congratulate yourself for figuring out what group they belong to. So you can
right. I don't care about that. I'll sometimes might marvel at how I will see some of the same patterns repeat themselves when somebody starts to express himself, but I don't use that to be like, oh, you're just a typical blah. I look at it as, okay, it's a cool thing to me that so many people sort of fit into certain these things and yet retain their individualism and are still their own human being with the ability to, to have free will and make their own decisions about what they want to do. And so I tell people, like, me saying, you seem to be this type of person doesn't mean that I'm in any way limiting your ability to make your own decisions. It doesn't lock you into any kind of set of behaviors that you have to follow. It's just, this is, this lines up with this observation of people, not, oh, well, because you're this, you're going to do the following 6 or 7 things. Like, it's not like that.
I like that what you've recently done, and I think it's quite amusing, that you are trying to beat the young theists at their own game by learning Jung better than them.
Yeah, it's not necessarily
quite amusing.
Yeah, it's more like just, holding those things as accurate in terms of if people are going to say, they're going to give Jung this like revered power, like, oh, well, everything should be based on him, then they ought to at least know what those things are and not distort them into their own. Because basically what people tend to use it for is to sort of make up their own kind of system, but then claim it's the purest one. And yeah, Kenneth did a Podlair hand signal you couldn't see, but yeah, there's a lot of that type of thing where they act like this is well, you just have to follow my way and then everything's good. If those other ways are stupid. And are based on stereotypes or whatever they want to say about them. What I found is the people who actively do that tend to have their own stereotypes. They just based it on something else. So the real stuff from Jung, 85% of it is just kind of extraneous, meaningless stuff to non-idealists because it's just a whole lot of yammering about stuff that it's like so heavy and like psychologist talk or whatever you want to call it. But there are some gems of things within that, and when you actually read the actual things he said about what people,
there's also some Steves.
Yeah, what people call the cognitive functions, they tend to either misquote or not quote at all, and just sort of distort it to whatever they want it to be. And so my idea is, look, when I actually know this stuff, to be able to kind of hold people to that and say, okay, if you're going to use this, then use it right, or else don't use those terms. So anyway, we got to get going.
Though I did want to say, I want to let you know, from the bottom of my heart, I've always felt you're an atypical blah.
Oh, thank you. That's a good way to end it. We're both atypical blahs. So, but within a system, you could say that we're typical in some ways, but atypical in others. So, and also
you're typical in your atypicalness.
Yeah, there you go. Sure. So
I'm Z-typical.
All right.
Right. So, folks, it's goodbye for me.
Good night, ding, 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 ding.
And good night from those two. Now clicking stop.